Imagine you're sitting at home with your friends and family around dinner time when suddenly you notice lights and sirens outside. You step outside your front door to find your home surrounded by police, barking orders at you. In the confusion, you find yourself shot dead. Well, that's exactly what happened to 25-year-old Andrew Finch in Wichita, Kansas, the victim of what is called swatting. That is calling the SWAT team in on people you don't like. But in this case, Andrew Finch hadn't even annoyed anybody. Gents, this is just one of the most disturbing stories since I don't know when. I'm going to read you this intro from the Ars Technica write-up of the story. Tyler Barris, a young man in Southern California, is alleged to have called in a lengthy threat to Wichita police on Thursday night of last week after a Call of Duty game in which he lost a $1.50 wager. Screenshots posted to various Twitter accounts show the dispute escalating. Shortly thereafter, the Wichita police received a call alleging that someone at this address had killed the father, taken his family hostage, poured gasoline around the home, and was ready to light it on fire. Cops descended on the area and cordoned it off when 28-year-old Andrew Finch opened the front door of his home to see what all the lights and flashing was about. He was shot dead. And add insult to injury, the police then rounded up his mother and everybody else in the house in handcuffs and brought them to police station for questioning. Now, clearly, the police were worked up after a 20-minute phone call of escalating threats and arson and murder and all the rest. But how do you show up at this scene, Scott, shoot somebody dead the first moment you see them practically, and then arrest everybody in the house that is not doused with gasoline?
I have never been in a position like this, so let me just start off by saying I don't know what terrors you must endure on an almost weekly basis being a SWAT officer, when knowing that, every call you go out on, you could potentially be at the receiving end of somebody's firearm. And I hesitate to leap to conclusions, but in the amateur mind, you construct this scenario where you say, yeah, once you've got a perimeter secured and you are, behind obstacles so that your officers and your riflemen are safe, how is it possible that a guy stepping out of his door when you've got all kind of night vision stuff and you've got all this capability, how is it possible that you're coming in with a huge show of force and one guy comes to the door confused, does the wrong thing, and you shoot him dead? Like, it just seems like there's that escalated way too fast. And again, I just feel like an idiot for second guessing people who have that job. And yet I can't help but think that we have gotten to the point where we are so catastrophizing every incident that happens that we assume the worst. I don't think it's bad to prepare for the worst, but I think you can't make the worst your first. You can't go in with the assumption that the first action we're going to take is to go nuclear, so to speak, and use the major power immediately. I know more facts are going to come out about this case, and I also know we've entered a terrifying new age when people have the ability to deceive law enforcement to such a degree. And I don't even want to go into the connection between, people who live their entire lives spending 6 or 8 hours a day shooting imitation people and getting off on it.
Yeah, it's just one of the worst stories I've come across in 15 years of blogging and 30 years of following the news. Making this worse, apparently there is a professional swatter. It's a guy with a Twitter account that's since been suspended. By the way, Bosch Faustin, the guy who draws the Mohammed cartoons, he's been suspended from Twitter as of, I think, Monday of this week. But the people who actually threaten his life, their Twitter accounts are still safe. Anyway, this SWAT-utastic guy was sitting in the library. He says, this was an interview done after the killing. They asked him if he feels responsible. He says he was sitting in the library and minding my own business, and he said, sure, I'll take care of this. And he got the whole thing going, and he says he's not responsible because he didn't show up at the door and he didn't pull the trigger. He wasn't the cop with the rifle behind a car. Bill, I think this guy is just as guilty as the cop who pulled the trigger. What do you say?
Well, we don't know how guilty the cop who pulled the trigger is. as Scott said, we don't know. It sounds pretty iffy, but we weren't there and we don't know.
Oh, you can find the video
question
on Facebook if you want. The Wichita Police have it posted.
Okay, I'll get back to that in a minute. But without question, this expert swatter and the person who called him need to go to jail for some degree of murder.
Yeah.
It's either first-degree murder or second-degree murder, but they need to go to jail for murder.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm struck. I just instantly reminded of some of the arrests that followed the Inauguration Day protests of Donald Trump, where they put 220 people who were smashing windows, and they put them in jail. And one of these kids said, "How come I'm in jail? You know, why am I in jail? Everybody else has done this before. Nobody's gone in jail before. How come they're picking on me?" Strangely enough, this is one of the areas I'm going to be going into in 2018 with this company, is this whole video game ethos and the danger of it and what we can do about it. But put that aside for a second. When you decide to call somebody and send a SWAT team to their house by telling the SWAT team that this is an extremely dangerous individual who's already killed, you are attempting murder on that person. Right. And if you become an intermediary, you're no better or worse than a hired hitman. And this idea that, well, I didn't pull the trigger, well, if I hire somebody to kill somebody, I didn't pull the trigger either. That doesn't make me not guilty of first-degree murder. So these people need to be punished, and I mean severely, severely punished, not just as an example to other people, but because anybody who could do something like that, I perceive to be a danger to society. I think both of these people are dangers to society. They need to go to jail for a significant number of years and think it over. I would like to address the one thing about the SWAT end of it. I haven't seen the video, and again, I want to preface this the way that Steve has, and Scott as well. I have enormous respect for law enforcement, and one of the reasons I respect them the most is I've done a few simulated situations with guns, and you do not know how terrifying that is and how adrenalized you are. So with that said, I agree that there does seem to be an increasing tendency of SWAT teams to basically assume that they're going to be fired on by weapons that apparently aren't even being shown. You know, when you have 30 rifles trained on a suspect, unless that suspect pulls a gun and levels it at the police, I can't see any possible justification for shooting that guy dead. And as a slight ancillary to this, which bothers me enormously, and I know bothers a lot of people too, there seems to be an incredible rise in the number of cases of either SWAT teams or just regular police investigations where people go to somebody's house and end up shooting their dog. I mean, I don't know how many of these you've heard. But the time and time again, a policeman goes to somebody's house, a dog is behind a chain-link fence barking, the policeman shoots the dog dead and claims it was to preserve his own safety. I mean, this is not what we expect from our police forces. And needless to say, this is a small number of people. I suspect that a lot of this is the result of this just this sort of slander and disrespect towards policemen that generates in some of them a sense of defensiveness and a sense of
us versus them.
You know,
really.
Yeah, and maybe the standards are lower than they used to be, and all of this. It's certainly a more dangerous world. I'm not trying to second guess policemen, but I will tell you this: if I had a cocker spaniel or something like that behind a fence, a policeman came to my door for some reason he thought was important, and that dog starts barking. It's the dog's job to start barking. He walks over and shoots that dog. There's something wrong with that man. That man needs to go to jail.
Yeah, Steve, Bill, can I
go
throw
ahead,
in something
Scott,
else, Steve? It's because it makes me think. It's not even the officers or the SWAT people on scene that I think disturbs me most. It's how they got there and what they were told before they got there. And it occurs to me that the information they had based on what you've told me and what I've read so far would not hold up in a court of law as far as, you've got one testifier. You've got one person saying, here's what's going on. It wouldn't even make a story in a legitimate newspaper because you've got no corroboration of the facts on the ground. And so to be able to take a single person's story about something that's happening And to extrapolate that into, we need to go in there with full armor and deal with this as if we were, trying to rebuff an invasion.
The house was under siege, effectively.
Yeah, there's got to be a protocol, and maybe there is, and they followed it. But there's got to be a protocol, I think, here that makes more sense in terms of escalation.
Yeah.
I just want to add one thing to that, too, because this thought occurred to me. I don't think you can wait for a second call, for somebody to second a call if there's gunfire or something like that. Their duty is to respond as quickly as possible. However, I don't think it's unreasonable to have somebody, while the team is in transit or while they're getting geared up to go, to have somebody do a quick record search of the person in that house. Is this person a lifelong suspected drug dealer? Does this person have a history of assault? If you're going to somebody's house and they have no criminal record whatsoever, people don't just snap like that as a general rule. I think, there ought to be some sort of assignment of what the suspected threat level is going to be. But in any event, this is a horrible tragedy. I think the SWAT thing needs to be addressed on some level, the police thing on some level. But the people that actually caused this murder, these people need to go away.
Yeah, what the police officer did was a killing, possibly a manslaughter, maybe a murder. What those swatters did, these high-level doxers did, that is murder for sure. It was no different than instead of suicide by cop, it was murder by cop.
That's beautifully said. That's exactly what it was. Yes.
All right, folks. I've got one, maybe two things to wrap this up. One, there's been a sea change in our policing, and I can't remember if it was Glenn Reynolds who wrote this at Instapundit or one of his commenters, but he said you could tell it in Hill Street Blues. I wish I could remember the actor's name, but the original sergeant in charge giving the briefing every morning, right before everybody left at the end of the meeting, it always says the same thing, and it started off the show. He said, "All right, let's be careful out there."
Yeah.
And the actor passed away at about the middle of the series run. It was replaced by a new guy, a crankier guy, who said at the end of every morning briefing, "All right, let's do it to them before they do it to us." And that has become the attitude in our police departments. And I'm not saying it's entirely unjustified, because it isn't. But the result now is this combustible mix we have of people with no decency, with no perspective, who think it's fun to send out a SWAT team. And this mix, it is proving absolutely deadly. And the only way I know to put a stop to it is, number one, we've got to have our police be given better training. We've got to. We may have to punish some police too. And if we see some of these guys go to jail, I'd be fine with that. But we've got to crack down first on this doxing business, on this swatting business, by sending people to prison for a long time. Because if you think you're tough while playing Call of Duty, I bet prison's got a few things to teach you.
You betcha, amen.
And that is the right angle on that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.